I was the kind of employee who knew the janitor's name, who brought cupcakes on people's birthdays and stayed late when no one asked. 10 years at Argon Tech. 10. Not a single warning. No misstep. So when I got called into HR that Thursday morning, I actually smiled. I thought maybe it was about the mentorship program I'd applied to lead. But the moment I walked in and saw the envelope on the desk, I knew. Termination due to mishandling of Project Zephyr. I hadn't even touched that project. The whole thing felt like a badly rehearsed play. Cold room, flat voices, no eye contact. "You have 15 minutes to clear your desk," they said, like they were reading off a checklist. I couldn't even form words, just nodded. A security guard, who looked more awkward than threatening, stood waiting by the door. My hands shook as I packed up a decade of memories into a single box. A cracked coffee mug, my favorite pen, photos of my team, who didn't even know yet what was happening. As I walked through the hallway, past familiar faces frozen in confused silence, I felt like a ghost. My badge no longer worked. My name was already erased from the internal system. And yet, the sting wasn't just in the firing. It was what came next. Within hours, word spread like wildfire. Somehow, I was already being labeled unreliable. I hadn't even made it home before my inbox was flooded with unsubtle questions and cold shoulders. That's how fast a decade gets rewritten. I sat in my car in the parking lot for almost an hour. Engine off, radio off. Just me, staring at that stupid cardboard box on the passenger seat. I couldn't cry. I couldn't even scream. I just kept replaying the last few minutes, wondering if I missed a sign, a warning, anything. My mind went straight to rent, bills, health insurance. But underneath the panic, there was this quieter ache. After 10 loyal years, I was disposable. The weirdest part? No one from the team reached out that day. Not a single text, not even a confused, "Are you okay?" I wasn't just removed, I was deleted. And the silence? That cut deeper than the HR script ever could. I tried to sleep that night, but my mind spun in circles. Was this political? A setup? Was I naive to think merit mattered? Every possibility made me feel more foolish and more furious, especially when I realized who had been on Project Zephyr. It was Darren. Darren, the guy who always passed the buck and smoothed things over with charm. I remembered covering for him more than once. And now, somehow, I was the scapegoat for his mess. I opened my laptop at 2 a.m. just to check LinkedIn. My profile was still intact, but the messages had changed. Heard what happened. Tough break. You'll bounce back. I read every word like a coded insult, as if they already believed I'd done something wrong. And maybe worse, as if I wouldn't recover. The days that followed felt like some strange kind of morning. I kept waking up at 6 a.m. out of habit, making coffee I no longer needed to rush for, scrolling through job boards with a pit in my stomach. My identity had been so tied to that company. I didn't realize how much until it was gone. I couldn't even bring myself to update my resume. Every bullet point felt like a lie now. Led high-impact initiatives. And yet, here I was, discarded without a word of thanks. But the thing about hitting rock bottom? It forces clarity. Between bouts of shame and rage, a new voice started whispering. It didn't sound like revenge. It sounded like remembering. Remembering the late nights I solved problems no one else could. The interns I mentored. The ideas that got stolen and repackaged. I started writing them all down, not as a resume, but as a record. Something in me refused to let that version of me vanish just because someone else said so. And that's when the shift happened. I wasn't looking for sympathy anymore. I wasn't even looking for a job. I just wanted to feel real again, seen. So I reached out to Clara. She'd been let go a few months earlier, and we'd barely spoken since. I wasn't even sure she'd respond. But she did. Fast. "Let's get coffee," she said. Just like that. No pity, no awkwardness, just an open door. And somewhere between the dread and the doubt, I stepped through it. We met at a tiny corner cafe that smelled like burnt toast and second chances. Clara was already there, sipping something dark and bitter, just like the mood we both tried to pretend we hadn't brought with us. We hugged awkwardly, like two soldiers who'd been through the same war but never talked about it. She looked different, lighter maybe, or just free of the constant tightrope we used to walk at Argonne Tech. The first 5 minutes were all small talk, weather, mutual acquaintances, nothing real. Then Jules walked in. I hadn't seen her in over a year. She'd left before things got really toxic, but not before they tried to grind her down. Seeing her again lit something up in me. That familiar sense of solidarity, women who knew the quiet cost of surviving in rooms where we were never really welcomed. We ordered another round of coffee, and something shifted. The air got heavier. Words flowed. Honest ones, angry ones. We weren't venting. We were remembering. We talked about projects we led and never got credit for. About ideas we pitched that only got approved when someone else, someone male, repeated them louder. We compared how we were each dismissed, minimized, eventually pushed out under different excuses. But what surprised me most? None of us sounded defeated. Not really. We were bruised, sure. But there was this underlying fire, a stubborn kind of energy. The kind that doesn't want a second chance. It wants a brand new table. At one point, Clara leaned in and said, "What if we stopped waiting to be invited back in?" The question hit harder than it should have. For years, I'd been conditioned to believe success came from being accepted by companies, by gatekeepers, by people who never really saw us. But Clara's words cracked something open. What if we built something that didn't ask for permission? Something that didn't just include women. It trusted them to lead, to innovate, to own. Jules pulled out a napkin and started sketching. "We'd need seed money, of course," she said, as casually as if she were planning a weekend trip. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt insane and thrilling and impossible in the best way. We listed what we hated most about corporate life: the silencing, the red tape, the endless approval chains. Then we started naming what we'd do differently. A flat structure, flexible schedules, a culture that actually meant something. By the time the espresso turned cold, we weren't daydreaming anymore. We were outlining. We weren't just three women licking wounds. We were founders in the making. Clara mentioned an old contact looking for consultancy help. Jules knew someone with office space to rent cheap. I felt my heart race in a way it hadn't since, maybe ever. Because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what we were about to build. We clinked our espresso cups like champagne glasses, laughing harder than any of us had in months. There was bitterness in the toast, sure, but also purpose. The kind that simmers in your chest and makes your hands itch to start. We didn't have a name yet, or funding, or a clue how we'd compete with the giants that tossed us aside. But we had something they didn't: truth. We had lived every broken promise of the old system. Now we were rewriting the rules. That night, I opened a shared doc and typed out, "Mission: build a company where no one has to shrink to fit." It felt dramatic and necessary, like a declaration. Clara added, "Where integrity isn't optional." Jules followed with, "Where leadership doesn't look the same every time." I stared at the blinking cursor after that. So many companies talked about values, but we had the scars to back them up. That made us dangerous and deeply credible. We didn't plan for the idea to take over our lives, but that's what it did. Slowly, then all at once. Calls turned into strategy sessions. Coffee meetups turned into business plans. That doc grew until it became a pitch deck. And by the end of the week, we weren't asking what if anymore. We were asking when. Something had shifted inside all three of us. They fired me from a job. But in that cafe, with those two women, something bigger got hired. We launched Nova Mind Solutions with exactly 3 laptops, 0 clients, and a co-working desk that barely fit all our elbows. There was no ribbon cutting, no press release, just 3 women who refused to disappear quietly. The first few weeks were brutal. We were building everything from scratch: branding, services, workflows. No IT department to call, no assistants, no fallback plan, just adrenaline, late nights, and too much instant coffee. I was scared, but it was a new kind of fear, the kind that came with possibility. We split everything by instinct. Clara handled operations. Jules took the lead on design and branding. I focused on outreach, pitching our services like a woman possessed. Most companies never responded. A few sent polite no thanks. And then, one didn't. It was a mid-sized firm, fed up with Argontech's empty promises and slow delivery. They were skeptical at first, but I could feel something shift on the 3rd call. They didn't just want a vendor, they wanted vision. When the contract came through, we screamed so loud the guy at the next co-working table dropped his lunch. That first deal wasn't just money, it was proof. It was oxygen. It validated every gut instinct we'd followed, every rule we'd broken, every tear we hadn't let fall. We printed out that first check and stuck a copy on the wall like art. From there, momentum started to build. Slowly, then faster. Each new client came with its own battle, but also its own story. Word got around quicker than we expected. We weren't flashy, but we were fast and honest. Clients loved that we didn't overpromise. We just over-delivered. We responded like humans, not scripts. Every win felt personal, because it was. Each client we landed was one more vote of confidence against the lies they'd told about us. And every time someone asked, "Wait, weren't you at Argontech?" we'd smile and say, "Not anymore." We didn't owe them our silence, just our success. We hired our first employee 3 months in, then another, and another, all women, all brilliant, all underappreciated elsewhere. Our office moved from a cramped table to a small loft with peeling paint and bad Wi-Fi, but it felt like home. There were post-it notes on every wall, playlists echoing from Clara's laptop, and coffee that tasted like grit and dreams. We weren't just building a business, we were building proof. Proof that you didn't have to play by the old rules to win. We held weekly meetings where everyone actually spoke. No fake nods, no jargon, just truth. We asked people what they needed to thrive, and then we listened. That simple act made us different. I saw women come alive in those rooms. Ideas flowed. Confidence grew. We weren't just writing invoices, we were rewriting stories. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was leading. By the end of our first year, Nova Mind wasn't just a name, it was a movement. Industry blogs started mentioning us. One even called us the quiet revolution shaking up consulting. That headline stayed taped to our fridge for months. We got invited to panels, podcasts, even a morning show. And with every new platform, we made sure to say the names that got us here. Clara, Jules, every woman who was told she was too much or not enough or simply replaceable. But growth brought pressure. Good pressure, but still, pressure. We had to scale fast without losing our soul. I found myself working longer hours than I ever had at Argontech, but it felt different. I was working for something real. Something that honored the bruises. We made mistakes, of course, missed deadlines, overscheduled weeks. But we learned. We apologized. We got better. There was no shame in failing forward, just momentum and a kind of joy that can't be faked. One night, after a long client call, I stayed back and looked around our now bustling office. I saw a team that didn't exist a year ago. I saw energy, ownership, Fire. I thought about that cardboard box from the day they fired me, how small it felt in my lap. And now, here I was, in a space we built from scratch, surrounded by people who believed. What started with betrayal now ran on belief. And belief was finally enough. The invitation came in a glossy envelope, thick with formality. Keynote opportunity, Future Tech Conference. I almost laughed when I saw the location, same convention center Argonne Tech used to dominate. Clara read it over my shoulder and raised an eyebrow. Full circle? She asked. No, I said. Full upgrade. We accepted. Not because we needed the spotlight, but because we'd earned it. This wasn't about proving anything anymore. This was about showing up, unapologetically, in rooms that once shut us out. The day of the event, the air buzzed with that mix of nerves and noise only big conferences have. Fluorescent lights, badge lanyards, overpriced coffee. We stepped onto the main stage to a packed house. I spotted Argonne Tech's executives in the front row almost immediately. Same suits, same smug posture, but this time they weren't presenting. They were watching, waiting. I smiled, not out of pettiness, but power, because this time I was walking into the fire holding the torch. My talk wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding. I told the story of how NovaMind began, not as a comeback, but as a calling. I spoke about values, inclusion, speed, and grit, about what happens when you stop trying to fit and start building where you belong. The room was silent, hanging on every word. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. I saw Jules wipe away a tear. Clara gave me a slow, proud nod. And right then, I knew we had shifted the ground beneath us. After the speech, people lined up, handshakes, cards, congratulations, a blur of names and smiles. But then came him, one of Argonne Tech's top execs, still wearing that perfect boardroom grin. Valentina, he said, like we were old friends. That was impressive. You've built something remarkable. Perhaps there's room for collaboration. I felt Clara tense beside me. Jules turned slightly, lips pressed tight. I took a breath and smiled, not sweetly, but clearly. That kind of smile that says, I see exactly what this is. My voice didn't shake. I don't work with companies that silence their best minds, I said. But thank you. I learned a lot watching what not to do. He blinked, a fraction too long, and gave a small nod before fading back into the crowd. It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary, a line drawn not in anger, but in wisdom. That moment was never about him. It was about us, about refusing to let old power rewrite the new rules we'd built from the ground up. As we walked out of the venue, people still whispered our name. NovaMind. Some with curiosity, some with respect, a few, maybe, with envy. But no one ignored us. That alone was a revolution. We stepped into the sunlight, heels clicking on pavement, adrenaline humming. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was proving myself. I felt like I was honoring every woman who never got her chance. And in doing that, I finally claimed mine. That evening, we celebrated with cheap champagne and takeout on the office floor. No fancy dinner, just the people who mattered. The team gathered around, asking questions about the talk, laughing at how nervous I'd been right before stepping on stage. We weren't just colleagues anymore. We were something stronger, survivors who chose to thrive. I looked at their faces, lit up with hope and hunger, and thought, this is the boardroom I always needed. No polished table, just purpose. Later that night, I found a message waiting for me on LinkedIn. Another woman, let go from a big firm, uncertain about her next step, had watched the conference online. Her message was short, but it hit me hard. Thank you. You reminded me I'm not done yet. That right there, that was the point. We hadn't just built a company. We'd created something contagious, a kind of courage that dared other women to rise too. the kind that doesn't shrink to fit. And in that quiet moment, scrolling through words from strangers and teammates alike, I realized something simple and stunning. I hadn't lost anything that day they fired me. I'd been released. Released from trying to earn space in rooms never meant for me. Released to build better ones. She walked away, not with revenge, but with revenue. And far more than that, with respect. 2 years after that cardboard box moment, Novamind was no longer a startup. It was a force. We had a wait list of clients, a growing team, and media features we didn't even pitch for. Business schools started reaching out to study our leadership model. Investors who once ignored our emails were now sending gifts and invites. But we didn't forget. Not the silence, not the humiliation, and definitely not the grit it took to rebuild what they thought they'd destroyed. That memory stayed sharp and useful. I was sitting in a conference room one afternoon, finishing up a call, when a young woman knocked on the glass. Intern, nervous. She said, "There's a journalist here, wants to speak with the founder directly." I invited them in, mid-30s, sharp eyes, recorder already running. "Everyone's talking about Novamind," they said. "But what kept you going when it all fell apart?" The room got quiet. I sat back, smiled, and told the truth. Not the polished version, the real one. It wasn't about bouncing back, I told them. It was about refusing to disappear. Being wrongfully fired was the best career move someone else ever made for me. They paused, almost stunned. "You really believe that?" they asked. "I don't just believe it," I said. "I live it, every day." They nodded slowly, scribbled something down, and I could already see the headline forming in their mind. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that the story, the real story, was finally ours to tell. After the interview, I took the long way home. Windows down, breeze in my hair, letting the city hum around me like background music. It hit me then, not just what we'd built, but what we'd replaced. For every woman who left a job questioning her worth, there was now a place that proved her value didn't depend on someone else's approval. Novamind had become more than a company. It was a signal flare, proof that success doesn't have to look the way they said it should. Back at the office, the team was prepping for our next client presentation. Someone was testing slides, someone else printing handouts, someone laughing too loud by the coffee machine. I stood in the doorway for a second, just watching. These weren't just employees. They were believers, builders, women who, in another world, might have been told to tone it down or wait their turn. But here, they ran departments, pitched ideas, and made decisions like they belonged. Because they did. Every now and then, I'd get a message from someone still stuck in a place like the one we left. Some asked for advice. Some just wanted to be seen. I tried to answer every single one. Because I remembered how lonely it felt in that parking lot, box in hand, wondering if I mattered anymore. I made myself a promise back then, that if I ever made it through, I'd make sure no one else had to do it alone. And that promise, more than any profit margin, is what kept me going. Some nights, I still think about that final HR meeting, the way they looked at me like I was a problem to be managed. It's almost funny now. They thought they were closing a door, but they were handing me the match I needed to light something entirely new. They tried to bury my reputation. They didn't realize I was already planting something, and now it was blooming, loud, wild, impossible to ignore. Novamind wasn't my revenge. It was my rebirth. We didn't grow because we were perfect. We grew because we were honest. Because we built trust the same way we built the business. One conversation, one risk, one shot in the dark at a time. Our legacy wasn't just in our numbers, or our reach, or our headlines. It was in the way people stood taller after working with us. The way they walked into meetings a little more sure of their voice. That was the real success story. And no one could take that away. So if you ask me what I'd change, the answer is nothing. Not the firing. Not the fear, not the fallout, because every piece of it, even the pain, led to this. To a place where women build power, not just chase it. Where ambition isn't punished, it's expected. They wanted to end my story. Instead, they helped write the best chapter yet. And the best part? We're still just getting started.